Have you ever had that moment when something so ancient, so immovable, suddenly blinks and whispers back at you? In 1993, inside the Queen's chamber of the Great Pyramid of Giza, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a tiny robot into a tunnel no wider than a shoebox. This wasn't a scene from a sci-fi film. It was real, and what he found should have been front-page news around the world. But it wasn't. Unlike the shafts in the king's chamber that opened to the outside, this shaft led nowhere, or so we thought. As the robot rolled in deeper, past 30 feet of narrow limestone, it stopped. Not because the passage had ended, but because it had arrived at a door. A real door. Solid limestone, polished smooth, 2 copper handles, metal, mind you, protruded from its face. Metal inside a structure that, by all mainstream archaeological accounts, was built entirely of stone. And it wasn't just the door, it was what it meant. If there's a door, there's a space behind it, and if there's a space, why was it sealed? What were they trying to hide or protect? Rudolf Gantenbrink knew this was more than a simple architectural curiosity. He'd stumbled upon something forbidden, something that didn't fit into the carefully packaged timeline we've all been sold. So he did what any curious mind would. He asked for permission to go further, to drill a hole and peek behind the door. But instead of applause, he was met with silence, or worse, rejection. The Egyptian government, with Zahi Hawass at the helm, a man as famous for his media appearances as for his control over Egyptian antiquities, abruptly shut the entire project down. They banned Gantenbrink from the site. Just like that, doors closed on the literal and metaphorical mysteries of the pyramid. Why? Why deny exploration? Why silence evidence that could reshape our understanding of ancient history? This wasn't the first time Zahi was accused of suppressing inconvenient findings. In fact, many independent researchers have long suspected that mainstream Egyptology isn't just mistaken. It's carefully curated, like a museum tour with half the rooms locked. What we're told about the Great Pyramid in school is a neat, little story. It was a tomb built by Pharaoh Khufu around 2500 BCE. It took 20 years to build, and it was constructed with thousands of laborers pulling stones up ramps. A feat of ancient engineering, but understandable, human. But what if none of that is true? Let's start with what isn't in the pyramid. No inscriptions, not a single hieroglyph carved into the walls, something virtually every other Egyptian tomb includes. No mummy, no gold, nothing that screams this was Khufu's final resting place. Instead, we're left with graffiti. Yes, graffiti, painted in red. Supposedly the name of Khufu scrawled inside a chamber so hard to access, it wasn't even discovered until modern times. Not engraved, not ceremonial, just painted. That's the proof mainstream scholars hold up as evidence that Khufu built the pyramid. But here's a thought experiment. If someone tagged a skyscraper in spray paint and wrote, "Steve was here," does that mean Steve designed the building? It's not just the lack of evidence, it's the scale. The Great Pyramid is made of 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 80 tons. Some of these were transported over 500 miles from Aswan, before the invention of the wheel, before the compass, before iron tools. And yet, the pyramid stands not just tall, but precise. So precise, in fact, that you can't even slide a razor blade between the joints of the stones. There's no mortar holding them together. It's as if each block was laser cut to perfection. The entire structure is aligned almost perfectly to true north, with a margin of error so small we didn't even have the tools to measure it until satellites came along. And while all of this should be celebrated as a feat of human ingenuity, it raises a haunting question. If they were capable of this 4,500 years ago, why did no one else replicate it? Why didn't this incredible technology or knowledge spread and evolve like all others? Why instead does the Great Pyramid stand alone, technologically unmatched, architecturally mysterious, and historically isolated? That's the part of the story we're not supposed to ask about. That's the silence Gantenbrink ran into when his robot hit the door. That's why researchers like him and others who dig too deep often find themselves on the outside looking in, because maybe the real mystery of the Great Pyramid isn't just how it was built, but why we're not allowed to question it. Let's talk about the impossible. Because if we accept the mainstream claim that the Great Pyramid was built in just 20 years, we're talking about one of the most mind-bending logistical feats in human history, achieved without cranes, concrete, or even the wheel. The math doesn't lie. There are roughly 2.3 million stones in the Great Pyramid. If you had 20 years to complete it, no breaks, no holidays, no excuses, that would mean cutting, transporting, lifting, and precisely placing over 300 stones a day. That's one block every 212 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 2 decades straight. Let's pause there. One block every 2.5 minutes. These aren't Lego bricks we're talking about. Some of the blocks, especially those in the King's Chamber, weigh up to 80 tons. That's heavier than a military tank. And yet we're told they were dragged on wooden sleds using papyrus ropes over wet sand. It's a lovely image for a bedtime story. But in real life, it collapses under the weight of its own absurdity. There's video evidence showing that even with modern-day cranes, moving a single 30-ton block is a struggle. Steel cables snap, hydraulics groan. That's with all our contemporary engineering. Muscle. Now picture a bunch of barefoot laborers in loincloths yanking at 80-ton stones uphill on a ramp. And speaking of ramps, another delightful theory. Egyptologists suggest that a massive spiral ramp circled the pyramid as it was built, allowing workers to haul stones higher and higher. There's just one catch. To build a ramp sturdy and wide enough to support that kind of weight, you'd need more material than the pyramid itself. And if it was dismantled afterward, where did all that debris go? Spoiler, it doesn't exist because it never existed. Now let's zoom in on the stones themselves. If you visit the Great Pyramid today and stand at its base, it's not the height. That overwhelms you. It's the precision. Each limestone block fits together so tightly that you can't even slide a razor blade between them. No mortar, no adhesive, just stone resting against stone in perfect unison. It's as if every block was machined, not chiseled, which brings us to another problem. We're told the ancient Egyptians used copper chisels to cut these stones. But in controlled experiments, modern archaeologists have attempted to recreate these cuts using tools identical to what the Egyptians supposedly had. After days of pounding, they produced nothing but blunted chisels and frustration. One researcher gave up and used a power saw to finish the job, ironically proving the opposite of what he set out to prove. And it's not just that the tools were ineffective. It's the implication behind the precision. Let's take one abandoned artifact as an example, a discarded sarcophagus located in a museum in Cairo. On its underside is a nearly 3-foot-long groove, cut slightly off-center. The builders stopped, scrapped it, and started again. That single detail speaks volumes. If you're using hand tools, you realize your mistake early. But to cut that deep before noticing, that suggests a fast-moving, high-efficiency tool, one that can remove a ton of material in a very short time. So what kind of tool were they using? Not copper, clearly. If it wasn't primitive tools and brute force, then what was it? What technology could explain this? Let me be clear. I'm not saying aliens, I'm saying advanced humans long before their time, possibly remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization we no longer remember. Here's another mind-bender. The pyramid is not just aligned with true north. It's the most accurately aligned structure on Earth, even more so than the Paris Observatory, which was built using modern instruments. Think about that. A civilization with no telescopes, no computers, no satellites, and yet they placed 2.3 million blocks in a perfect square that's aligned within 3/60ths of a single degree to Earth's geographic north. We didn't even know how precise that alignment was until we invented satellites, and that's just the geometry. The Great Pyramid also encodes mathematical constants. For example, take the base perimeter and divide it by the height, and you get pi p to a precision of 4 decimal places. Divide the total surface area of the sides by the area of the base, and you get phi, f, also known as the golden ratio, which governs everything from nautilus shells to galaxies. You cannot stumble into these ratios by accident. They are too precise, too meaningful. So here's the real question. If the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb, if it wasn't built with primitive tools, If it encodes mathematical knowledge we barely grasp today, then what was it? Some say it was a power plant, others a star map, maybe even a tool for connecting with higher realms. But whatever the answer is, it's not sitting in your high school history book. And as we peel back these layers of impossibility, one thing becomes clear. We're not just looking at stones. We're looking at a message from the past. Hidden in plain sight, etched in the geometry of the earth itself. So if the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb, and couldn't have been built by simple tools maybe, just maybe, it wasn't meant to be understood in physical terms alone. Let's lift our eyes upward, because the builders certainly did. That Great Pyramid of Giza doesn't just sit in the desert, it sits in perfect alignment with the Orion constellation, specifically the 3 stars of Orion's belt. When you look at the Giza plateau from above, the spacing and sizing of the 3 pyramids match those stars down to their slight offset. Coincidence? Maybe. But then you look further. On the spring equinox, light entering through the southern shaft of the king's chamber aligns precisely with Orion's belt, but only if you turn back the sky 4,500 years. The exact date the pyramid is supposed to have been built. You know what's even more mind-blowing? That same celestial alignment exists in Teotihuacan, Mexico, where the ancient pyramids of the Maya follow the same layout. 2 civilizations, separated by oceans thousands of miles and supposedly thousands of years, building the same pattern, honoring the same stars. Either this was one gigantic ancient coincidence, or we're missing something massive. Now let's come back down to Earth, literally, because the Great Pyramid doesn't just align with stars, it aligns with planet Earth itself in ways that shouldn't be possible without global maps, satellites and geospatial mathematics. The pyramid is built at 29.9792458 degree N latitude. That's not just a random number. That's the exact same number as the speed of light in meters per second, 2999,792,458 ms. You heard that right. A monument, allegedly constructed 4,500 years ago, without electricity, optics, or even a metric system, somehow reflects one of the fundamental constants of modern physics. Coincidence again. Okay, let's talk scale. If you take the pyramid's base and multiply it by 43,200, you get the circumference of the Earth. Take its height times 43,200, you get the radius of Earth from the equator to the North Pole. Why 43,200? Because that's how many seconds there are in 12 hours, and 12 hours is half of a day. The Earth's daily rotation. Oh, and by the way, the Sun's radius is 432,000 miles. See a pattern? You might be thinking, that number's probably just a fluke. But hold on, the Earth wobbles on its axis, an astronomical process called precession, at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. Multiply 72 by 600. What do you get? Yep, 43,200. And when you measure the surface area of all 4 pyramid sides and divide it by the area of its base, you get phi, the golden ratio, 1.6 and 18. That number appears in spiral galaxies, DNA, sunflowers, hurricanes, seashells, and ancient architecture. So now we have pi, phi, the speed of light, Earth's dimensions, and celestial alignment, all encoded into one structure built thousands of years ago. This is no tomb, this is a code. But a code for what? Some researchers believe that the Great Pyramid wasn't just a passive monument. It was active, a machine of sorts, a harmonic resonator. Enter Joe Parr, an electronics engineer who spent over a decade studying the Great Pyramid's electromagnetic properties. In his experiments, he built small pyramid replicas and sent magnetic currents through them. What he discovered was astonishing. Under the right conditions, the pyramid began generating what he called a bubble of energy, a field that blocked gamma rays and electromagnetic radiation. That wasn't even the weirdest part. When he placed a spinning centrifuge inside the pyramid and spun it fast enough, the model pyramid began to levitate. Yes, levitate. Not only that, it began to phase shift, momentarily disappearing from sight, only to reappear embedded slightly into the walls of the testing chamber. Science fiction? Maybe, but Joe Parr wasn't alone. Other researchers have also observed odd energy behavior in pyramid structures. Even animals tend to avoid the king's chamber entirely. Now, what if this wasn't just architectural? What if it was technological? We know that the Great Pyramid contains massive amounts of quartz crystal embedded in limestone. And quartz, as you may know, is the very material we use in modern-day resonators, clocks, and electronics. When you apply frequency to quartz, it vibrates precisely. That's how your smartwatch tracks time to the millisecond. So what happens when you scale that up to a 480-foot-tall pyramid made of stone and quartz, placed exactly at Earth's geodetic center, aligned to true north as incorporating pi, phi, and light? You get something else entirely, a harmonic machine, a map, a message, a trigger. We don't know. But one thing's for sure, whoever built the Great Pyramid, whether Egyptians, a lost civilization, or something even older, did so with an understanding of the Earth, the stars, and frequency that rivals or surpasses what we know today. And the most incredible part, these ancient minds might have been trying to preserve something, not just stone but knowledge, because when you carve data into solid rock, aligned with the heavens and anchored to Earth's core, you're not just building for your time, you're building for all time. If the Great Pyramid is a message, then who left it? And why do so many in power still seem so desperate to silence what it might say? Let's go back, way back. Not 4,500 years, but maybe 11,000. Maybe more. There's growing evidence, supported by geology and archaeology, that human civilization has been reset multiple times. You've probably heard of the Younger Dryas impact theory. Around 11,600 years ago, a massive celestial object, likely a comet, struck Earth and triggered the sudden end of the Ice Age. This wasn't a gentle shift in climate. It was a global cataclysm. Sea levels rose over 400 feet. Entire coastlines disappeared. Ecosystems collapsed. Species went extinct. And whatever sophisticated cultures may have existed before it vanished without a trace. Except, maybe not, because places like Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site in Turkey dated to the exact end of the Ice Age, prove that humans were building megalithic structures with astronomical alignments thousands of years before Mesopotamia or Egypt. The level of artistry and symbolism etched into Göbekli Tepe's stone pillars would be impressive even today. And it rewrites everything we thought we knew about ancient humans. So what if the Great Pyramid wasn't the start of human ingenuity, but a surviving remnant of an older, more advanced world? And what if the reason no one ever found Khufu's body inside the Great Pyramid is because it was never a tomb? What if instead it was a kind of resonant library, built not just to withstand time, but to communicate with it? Now take a moment to look at the Sphinx. We've always been taught it was built after the pyramids a mere 4,500 years ago. But in 1991, American Egyptologist John Anthony West, along with geologist Robert Schoch, studied the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure. What they found was shocking. The erosion on the walls couldn't have been caused by wind and sand, but by centuries of heavy rainfall. Here's the catch. The Sahara hasn't had that kind of rain in over 11,000 years. That puts the Sphinx, if the geology is correct, on the same timeline as Göbekli Tepe, a timeline where advanced builders existed before the flood, before the Ice Age ended, before history remembers. But when West presented his findings, Zahi Hawass, yes again, banned him from ever studying the Sphinx again. No peer debate, no additional research, just a door slammed shut, just like what happened with Rudolf Gantenbrink and the mysterious shaft. The question is, why? Why is modern Egyptology so threatened by the idea that ancient humans might have been smarter earlier? Why must every discovery be forced to fit inside a box that's 4,500 years old, no older? Maybe because if we admit that these structures came from a lost civilization, it changes everything. It means the story of humanity isn't linear, it's cyclical. It means we rise, we fall, and we forget. And maybe, just maybe, the Great Pyramid wasn't built to glorify a pharaoh, but to warn us, to remind us that time erases, floods wash away, fire consumes, but stone remembers. And if we ever hope to understand our place in this universe, we must first remember that our ancestors might not have been primitive at all. In fact, they may have been us before the storm. We walk around today with devices that store all human knowledge in our pockets. But what happens if the power goes out globally for a decade? What if the sky falls again? What do we lose? Our servers, satellites, and data centers are not eternal. They don't hum on forever, but the pyramid does. Maybe that's the real lesson. That knowledge must be built in harmony with nature, in stone, in shape, in the stars, if it's going to last beyond the next cataclysm. Maybe that's why phi, pi, and light speed are carved invisibly into its dimensions. Not because ancient builders wanted to impress us, but because they wanted us to wake up. We've been so obsessed with how the Great Pyramid was built that we've forgotten to ask the deeper question, why was it built to last forever?